Are you afraid of going insane? Think carefully, because this video will delve into a place where madness became the new norm. A place where the laws of the state, within whose borders it existed, were ignored. And its leader, a pastor, whose natural charisma compelled parents to abandon their dearly loved children. Recall Charles Manson and imagine someone 100 times more dangerous. We will explore the dark history of the Colonia Dignidad, which the media has dubbed nothing less than the colony of the damned. After learning its story, ask yourself once more, are you afraid of going insane? Or are you afraid that, if you were to find yourself in such a place, you might be the only one in your right mind? For the first few years after its founding, the global community was unaware of the colony's existence. Or rather, outsiders had no interest in it, for one simple reason: from the outside, it appeared to be an idyllic place. By 1962, a year after its establishment, Colonia Dignidad had officially registered as a charitable organization in central Chile. Within its territory, a farm, a bakery, and even a state hospital were established, where local residents received free medical care. All of this was done with the blessing of the Chilean authorities. Even the name was chosen with an eye toward maintaining a respectable public image. Colonia Dignidad, when translated from Spanish, means Colony of Dignity. The settlement's leader promised his followers a God-fearing life on the promised land. In return, they were to provide humanitarian aid to the impoverished rural population. All of this took place under the slogan, God, Labor, Discipline. This reputational facade, aimed at outsiders, seemed impeccable. However, as soon as questions arose about why the colony was founded in Chile and not in the homeland of its leader, the smile on people's faces would quickly turn to confusion and anger. The reason lay in the darkest part of his biography. It is time to meet the founder of this hidden earthly hell, Paul Schäfer. He was born in Germany on December 4, 1921. As a child, he lost an eye under circumstances that are not entirely clear, with the most common version being a fight with a peer. The young Paul did not miss the chance to become, as they say, a top student, joining the ranks of the Hitler Youth. However, due to the loss of his eye, he was unable to enlist directly in the Wehrmacht army. Instead, Schäfer was sent as a medic to the Western Front. Incidentally, he himself claimed that the glass eye was the result of a wound sustained on the battlefield. For some time, Paul served as a doctor in a Nazi field hospital in occupied France. Eventually, having reached the rank of corporal, he laid down his arms. This winding career path helped Schäfer become an expert in the use of drugs and tranquilizers, skills he would later put to use as the head of the colony. After such a turbulent youth, the former Nazi paramedic seemed eager to whitewash his reputation, founding a private social mission in 1954. On paper, this organization was engaged in charity work. In reality, through his teachings, Schäfer had won over the American preacher William Branham, who had begun to rapidly gain fame after the war. His ideas ranged from the obligation of a woman to submit to her husband to predictions of an apocalypse in which Los Angeles would be submerged. As strange as it may seem to us, the one-eyed Nazi was not seen by his followers as a caricatured villain. On the contrary, they admired him, followed him, and listened to his speeches very attentively. The year 1956 became a turning point for Schäfer. In the German city of Siegburg, near his hometown, he founded a boarding school for children whose parents were part of his religious community. They obediently handed over their children and worked for free for the benefit of the sect, unaware of what was truly happening behind the closed doors of the boarding school. And what was happening there was truly horrifying. I failed to mention an important, key detail in Schäfer's biography that preceded both the creation of the boarding school and the founding of the colony. Shortly after the end of World War II, Paul Schäfer was hired by an evangelical organization that cared for orphans. In 1952, Schäfer was expelled from this organization following accusations of sexually abusing several children. Now, after all that had happened, He had unlimited access to the boarding school's pupils and almost complete control over the minds of their parents. He was given full carte blanche to carry out his vile intentions. It might have been manageable, but even in a small town, such crimes are impossible to hide. Information leaked to the police. In the late 1950s, Paul Schäfer was charged with the sexual abuse of minors. Connections with influential people, established through the colony, shielded him for a while. He used this time to search for another, safer place for his sect. A place where no one would come to the aid of his followers, even if they heard their pleas for help. After several years of searching, in 1961, Paul Schäfer crossed the Atlantic Ocean and arrived in Chile. Around 230 people followed him. This was facilitated by Arthur Maschke, the Chilean ambassador to Germany. Thanks to him, Schäfer's followers were granted refugee status and provided with full legal support. On September 21, 1961, Paul Schäfer, together with his loyal associate Hermann Schmidt, purchased an abandoned farm, El Lavadero, spanning approximately 3,000 hectares. From that moment on, a history full of mysteries began, passed down as rumors from mouth to mouth. A history of a place where many entered, but only a few escaped. From the very first day, Schäfer, or as he was called within the colony, the Eternal Uncle, ordered the territory to be fenced off. He remembered the blow that publicity had dealt him in his homeland and now decided to completely isolate himself in his little kingdom. However, in its early years, full autonomy was only a dream. Nevertheless, the information barrier around the colony was successfully erected, and for a time, no news came out of it. This barrier cracked for the first time in 1966. The silence was broken by the first escapee, Wolfgang Müller. By that time, brutal measures had already been implemented within Dignidad to maintain order. Video cameras, microphones, and motion sensors were imported from Germany. All of this was placed around the perimeter to minimize the chances of dissenters escaping. But Wolfgang succeeded, albeit on his second attempt. The first was interrupted by the Chilean police, who caught him and returned him to the colony. He was then subjected to torture, the brutality of which would later be confirmed by many escapees. These tortures were described in terrifying detail by one of the former residents of the colony, Werner Schmidtke. It was a very large room, and each of us lay on our own bed. Between each bed, there was something like a wall or partition, and in the center of the room was a very, very bright lamp. The men were in the center, so they could see each of us, though we couldn't see who was there. On the beds, there was only a very thin sheet, and there was gas heating. To this day, I cannot stand the smell of gas. They gave us beeswax to put in our ears while we lay in bed. Then they blindfolded us with a towel and placed our hands at the sides of our legs, as if we were lying in a box. After a few minutes, another person came in. I remember him very well. He still lives in the colony. He pulled down our pants and left us naked. Fear set in. Our hearts were racing. Suddenly, despite the wax in our ears, we heard the scream of another boy. A loud scream. Later, I learned the reason when it was my turn with the cattle prod. It had been brought from Germany. Such a device is used to stun cattle. It was very powerful. They shocked us on the soft parts of the body, the head, and then the genitals. When someone screamed, they were immediately taken away. If you couldn't resist, if you screamed, they would take you to an unknown place. And, as we discovered, it was better to resist because if you didn't, even more brutal things would happen to you. There was another room with a bathtub and toilets. I remember there was another person there. I know his name, but he is already dead. This person was the main torturer. Imagine being stripped naked and placed in a bathtub of ice-cold water. Ice-cold water in winter. Your head is pushed underwater, and you feel something like a shock, certain you won't survive. Werner arrived at the colony when he was only 2 years old. This circumstance was common among many who were brought there as children. They were brought in at a very young age and then isolated from their parents. Families were divided into groups by age and gender, and children were taken from their mothers at birth. All adults were referred to as uncles and aunts. Thanks to this disunity and the ban on communication even among people living in the same group, total control over all residents of the villa became possible. The most monstrous aspect of Schäfer's mind games was that he made people forget about the madness happening around them. His service as a medic gave him enough knowledge to drug people, achieving the effects he desired without killing them or driving them insane. Many colonists recounted that every morning they would go to the local pharmacy, where they were given medication. The effects of such therapy were described firsthand by the wife of the first escapee, Gudrun Miller. I only noticed certain things here and there. Every time I said I saw something wrong, I was severely beaten and forced to take a lot of medication. I was given electroshock therapy, which caused memory loss, and this went on for years. I only later found out that I had been subjected to electroshock. Other people told me, and that's why I wanted to ask the doctor himself what it was and what they were doing to me. Why was I being tortured? I still notice the effects now. I have massive memory loss, but not enough to forget everything. I remember enough to speak publicly about all this and finally tell what happened in that place. The unbelievable things that happened to people there. That's what we want to clarify, and that's why we're talking about it now. Miller's escape did damage the eternal uncle, but not fatally. For a time, until things settled down, Schäfer was forced to flee to Argentina. It was then that his henchmen began creating personal files on guests from the Chilean elite. Many of them succumbed to their sick desires when they were offered sexual relations with boys and girls in the colony. During these acts, they were photographed, and the evidence was later used to blackmail officials, helping to protect the colony from the police. Over the years, Schäfer developed a very strong network of connections. Thanks to these influential supporters, Miller's case was closed. Schäfer was cleared of all charges, and the colony was able to continue its activities with impunity until the 1970s. When Salvador Allende was elected president, he immediately began pushing for the closure of the colony. Because of this, the colonists actively supported the opposition to Allende, particularly Patria y Libertad, a right-wing military group that fought against Allende's followers. Many militants from this group were trained within the walls of the colony, and a significant portion of their weapons were smuggled through the villa's territory. Additionally, Colonia Dignidad became a detention and execution site for Chilean political prisoners after the armed coup led by Pinochet in 1973. However, luck could not favor Paul Schäfer forever. Years later, the dictatorship in Chile collapsed, stripping the colony of much of its influence, and making it a prime target for journalists and law enforcement. One of the most significant contributions to the search for Schäfer came from investigative journalist Carola Fuentes. She had been following his case since 1966 and helped locate the Eternal Uncle's hideout in Argentina. Here's how she described the pursuit. We found a van registered to Peter Schmidt. We knew he was one of the people close to Schäfer in the colony. He had disappeared along with him in 1996. The van was registered to an address in the town of Chevalco. When we arrived, it turned out to be a motorcycle rental center owned by an Italian. When I started talking to him, I disguised myself as a German tourist to avoid raising suspicions. This man led our team to a cheese factory that might have been connected to the fugitive Messiah. That night, we followed one of Schäfer's accomplices in the dark along rural roads. We stopped, marked the location, and returned the next day to discover La Salida. It was a ranch that, as we found out a year later, was the place where Schäfer was hiding. One of our journalists infiltrated the area and spoke to neighbors, but no one mentioned an elderly man until one of the colonists, Fried Scheiner, known as Felipe in Argentina, hinted that an elderly man lived with them. An elderly man with some combat injuries, who was sick. These clues made us believe we were on the right track. In March 2005, The nightmare that seemed eternal finally ended. Its author was arrested and extradited to Chile. The judge sentenced him to 33 years. On April 24, 2010, Paul Schäfer died of a heart attack in his cell at Santiago prison. The colony still exists, but now anyone can leave. Those who remain are people who are not ready for life outside its walls. Now, under the name Villa Baviera, this ill-fated place has become another tourist attraction. Perhaps these buildings will serve as a long-lasting reminder of the consequences of unchecked power in the hands of a madman. Let the past remain in the past.